Hello dear heart, and welcome to this video where I'm going to start explaining in a little bit more detail how our system starts interacting in a real life way, the alchemical processes that's happening in the body and how the physiology and anatomy starts to interact with the energies that's going on. Okay, so first point that I want to bring us to is our sacrum. Our sacrum is an upside down triangle found here at the base. So it is connected to your hips, and from there the spine connects all the way up to what is called our ivory cavern, or known as our skull. Now our skull is a lot of pieces that is almost sewn together, and these pieces can still slightly move in and out of each other. So the understanding of this and how this is connected is this is what houses the single most important thing of our body, which is called the central nervous system. So the central nervous system is encased in this. So it's the brain and then the brain stem leading all the way out into the spine. And it is protected by the skull. It's protected by the vertebrae and protected at the end of it by the sacrum. Why is this important to know? Because every single time we breathe, this starts moving with us, okay? So the brain produces a fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. And this fluid is basically proteins and salts that is in a liquid or a plasma. Now, what we know about when salts and proteins is in a plasma or a solution is that they carry a charge. This is super important to note for later explanation. But the functions of the cerebrospinal fluid is almost, it acts as a carrier. So it can carry electromagnetic fields, it can also deliver proteins, hormones, nutrients, all of these things to the rest of the body. But in essence, the most important thing that it does is it creates buoyancy for the nervous system. So it protects it from sharp bones, things like that. If you've ever had a pinched nerve, then you know how extremely painful it is when the nervous system comes in between two bones and literally start touching or rubbing against it. So the cerebrospinal fluid keeps it mobile, not scaving into each other and also not bumping into any sharp bones. Let's start combining all of this. The sacrum, every single time we inhale, tilts backwards. And as it tilts backwards, this movement goes automatically and at the same time, along with the skull, what we call sutras, so these different parts of the skull, to move slightly away from each other. Okay, and when this happens, because there's more volume, the cerebrospinal fluid rushes down towards the tailbone. Now, when we exhale and the sutras of the skull close again, there's a small wave pulsation at the bottom of the spine, and the cerebrospinal fluid is pulled, sucked, and pushed up at the same time to go back into the brain. So how we start combining all of these is it starts moving with a charge and it starts moving in a direction. So how long does this take? It's a really slow movement. So if we take one molecule of cerebrospinal fluid and from the base of the spine all the way through the brain and all the way back down, takes about 12 hours. So essentially, we're flushing the brain with new nutrients, new hormones, all of these things about twice in a day. So this is also where the term circadian rhythms comes from, because there's cycles and rhythms that is carried into the brain and from the brain to the rest of the body twice per day. Okay, so now that we understand the inhale happening, the exhale happening, what's happening to the liquid in the central nervous system, now what I want to explain to you next is I want to go back into the explanation of how the molecules move and also how it is that we turn our spine into a magnet. Remember when I mentioned that the cerebrospinal fluid is basically proteins and salts in a solution or a plasma, and that creates a charge, okay? So when this charge moves, then essentially we create polarities. And there's a positive charge around the head, and there's a negative charge at the base of the spine. And this is how we actually turn our central nervous system into a magnet. And all of these little structures and systems that flows through the body and through the spine carries that charge with them, and now you have the magnetism of the body. So the magnetism of the body is also what is known in the quantum realm as the resonance state of the body. And as we synchronize the breath into certain rhythms, into certain melodies, as I like to call them, then you start synchronizing and resonating at a specific vibratory field. Now, I want us to move into the center of the brain, the master gland, or what is known as the pineal gland. So the cerebrospinal fluid enters through what is called a phallic gate, and when that phallic gate starts opening up, then the fluid, it's almost like a spiral movement, goes around the brain all the way circling into the center of the brain where we find the pineal gland. Okay, so when we're doing intentional breath work, when we're doing passionate breath work and not just the passive breath work, then when that gate opens, we start putting a mechanical force into the spinal fluid. So we're encouraging this fluid to move a little bit faster with more magnetism. And this starts influencing what we experience or what happens at the center of the brain. Now, the center of the brain contains this gland, and this gland programs all of the other cells in our body. Really exciting. Okay, so on the surface of our pineal gland, we get these tiny little crystalline figures that is made up of calcium carbonate. So these calcium carbonate crystals that is found on the pineal gland, it's almost like they are the rods and the cones that's also found in the eye. And this is why in yogic terms they refer to the pineal gland and to this area as the third eye, because you see beyond the five senses. It also is the place where we are producing our DMT from, as well as the lower lobes of lungs. So the lower lobes of lungs not only has more receptors for the parasympathetic nervous system, but it also secretes DMT or dimethyltryptamine, as well as the pineal gland. Now, something that's really important to notice is that your dimethyltryptamine, as well as your carbon, as well as all of these things produced as an effect of the body's metabolism, is actually the byproduct and is coded exactly to your DNA. Does that make sense? Okay, so let me go into a little bit more detail. So if you've never heard of dimethyltryptamine, this is also what is known as the spirit molecule. So this spirit molecule is said to actually give rise and make up this entire mental projection that we live through. But another thing that it does is it also dictates and has the capacity to detach the soul from the body. If this is too far, just have an open mind here. Okay, so with this happening, when we're actually doing breath work and passionately, actively breathing into the lower lobes of the lungs while using the diaphragm and putting a mechanical force into the brain and into the pineal gland, with this rhythm and with this motion that we spoke about, as the sacrum tilts back, the cerebrospinal fluid rushes down, and as we exhale, it rushes all the way up. And with a passionate active breath, we're pushing a deeper mechanical force into that. Once the cerebrospinal fluid hits onto the pituitary gland, it starts breaking those crystals. I like to envision it as a glow stick cracking. With those crystals, as they crack, they start glowing and they start emanating this light. More dimethyltryptamine is being produced. And with breath holds, I'll get to a video called intermittent hypoxic training and the benefits of that. When we overstimulate the parasympathetic nervous system with exhale holds, then what we are actually doing is the body starts switching off and it starts reprioritizing certain programs and certain functions within the body. And when doing so, what is happening is the enzyme that actually breaks DMT down to give us all the same similar experience of this mental projection, now that enzyme is downregulated, so which means there's a lot more dimethyltryptamine available for us and for the body to produce and use and interpret. And now with the magnetism, the magnet that's created into the central nervous system, with the magnetism and magnetic force that's going into the pineal gland and waves, because these crystalline figures on the pineal gland is also called piezoelectric. Okay, so this means that if a magnetic force is pushed into them, then an electrical charge is being pushed out. So, and then you get a little radio station, a radio wave. We're starting to pulsate out. We are receiving signals just like a radio, and this is beyond the senses. And then you get these intuitive hits, these wisdom nuggets drop in. You might be able to see fractalized patterns behind your eyes in your inner space. It just becomes really, really magical. So this is a little bit of the physiology, how that starts interacting and feeding and bleeding into the vibrational field, because everything is actually vibration, everything is frequency, and that just calcifies deeply into this physical body realm and matter. So I hope you enjoyed this. See you in the next video.